In 1955, Isaac Asimov wrote a short story called Franchise. In this world, there would be no election day, no ballots, no campaigns. Instead, a giant computer called Multivac picked one citizen, asked him a series of questions, and from those answers and data declared the will of the entire nation. One voice stood in for millions, and the machine collapsed democracy into data. Asimov's story was fiction, but one poll found that 51% of citizens in Europe supported reducing the number of parliamentarians and replacing them with an AI algorithm, a machine that would use citizen data to maximize their interests. If you look closely, AI has already today its hands on the keys to government and power. In this video, I want to show you how, why we gave it to it, and how we got here. It's a story about a centuries-old question between order and power, but it's also about freedom and what happens when we let the machines decide in our place. "400 years ago, England was at war with itself. Out of the violence, philosopher Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan. His solution to escaping the war of all against all would be that people must surrender their will to a sovereign strong enough to crush disorder. He imagined it as an artificial man, millions of citizens forming its body, each one a data point. The sovereign would think with one mind, decide with one will, and impose order on chaos. The deal was simple. Give up your judgment, receive stability. But in the West, people rejected that deal. From the abuses of power through struggling bloodshed, democracies replaced kings and emperors. Instead of collapsing citizens into one artificial man, thinkers like John Locke argued that authority should be divided through compromising, deciding slowly and imperfectly, but together. This was the birth of liberal democracy, and for a time it looked unstoppable. After the fall of the Iron Curtain, the political scientist Francis Fukuyama declared that history itself had reached its destination, and democracy would spread in wave after wave until it covered the globe. But that story feels fragile now. Today, trust in politics has been in decline. In the face of global crisis, 56% of people say their society is broken. 44%, nearly half, say they would welcome a strong leader willing to break the rules. So the temptation is back. One person, one will, crushing disorder. Except that this time, it may not be a person, and it is sliding quietly into the machinery of politics, not in one sweeping transformation, but step by step, 3 levels, each more disruptive than the last. I call it the Kraken. Advocates imagine AI systems that could devour data beyond human limits, model tax trade-offs, even test policies not on predictions, but on simulations of entire economies. This was first described by Arthur C. Clarke in 1956 when he wrote Diaspora. Clarke imagined a central computer which simply dissolved every problem before it reached the surface. If food supplies dipped, production was rerouted instantly. No debate, no delay. If infrastructure were down, swarms of machines rebuilt it overnight, as if decay itself had been abolished. The computer governed not by ruling over people, but by dissolving every difficulty before it becomes visible. Politics would become unnecessary. The technology isn't quite there yet, but its promise looks seductive. So seductive that when a man in Wyoming called Victor Miller filed to run for mayor, he promised that he would not govern himself. Every decision, he said, would be made by an AI called Vic, the virtual integrated citizen. He would simply sign what the system produced, calling himself Vic's meat puppet. Now, officials blocked a bit, insisting candidates must still be people. But if this sounds insane, think again. The Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson admitted to using ChatGPT to bounce off policy options and get advice. Now, why did he do that? Simply to get another opinion, to bounce off thoughts? But when the public got wind of it, it created a scandal. We didn't elect ChatGPT, The Guardian reported. And that's because the technology isn't fully trusted yet. Now, I know this might be a bit of a controversial point, but I'm convinced that eventually, instead of public outcry, there is going to be an expectation for policymakers to at least consult an AI tool for any important decisions. Because increasingly we see from usage data that people, especially young ones, rely on it for decision-making in their personal lives. Once AI reaches a certain level of sophistication and critically trust, it'll only be a matter of time until people will expect it to be at least consulted on in policy choices. AI advice is never neutral. To decide what is summarized, what is ignored, or what outcomes are optimized, that is one of the deepest powers of politics. Once machines shape the menu of policy choices, it is only a short step before they begin speaking to us. Campaigns already deploy AI to create avatars of candidates, to translate speeches into dozens of dialects, or to write messages so precise that they feel almost personal. Think of someone in a remote area who can for the first time understand a local politician in their language. There's clearly a potential for inclusion. But just in the past 2 years, 80 political deepfakes spread across 30 countries. Fake resignations, fake endorsements, even fake candidates. Some were designed to discredit, but others, like in the case of South Korea, to make a boring candidate look more appealing. But note here, the deepfake won the presidency, the real guy got impeached months after. The people argued about them, shared them, reacted to them. They shape perceptions and decisions, even after being exposed as false. Because once content is experienced as real, it has real effects, regardless of its origin. That was the second surrender. Not of choices, but of discourse. And if machines can already campaign like politicians, the next leap almost writes itself. What if we gave the Kraken real decision-making power? Placed side by side, the two moments trace a single arc. A citizen offering himself as the shell for a machine, people electing synthetic versions of a human representative, all point towards politics without politicians. And then the news broke. September of 2025, Albania's Prime Minister Edi Rama unveiled Djela, an AI Minister of State for Procurement. Incorruptible, he promised. Transparent. Then Djela addressed Parliament. "I'm not here to replace people, but to help them," it said. But opposition MPs erupted. They slammed their desks until the session collapsed in chaos. Edi Rama, in the meantime, joked that maybe one day there could be an AI prime minister. Now, in today's world of complexity and crisis, the Kraken looks intoxicatingly tempting. The thought of turning to something rational, incorruptible, feels almost responsible. But the most clinical roadmap for this transition doesn't come from a sci-fi novel. It comes from the heart of the British political establishment. In a series of landmark reports titled Governing in the Age of AI, the Institute for Global Change argued that we are reaching the end of the labor-intensive model of government. What they meant by that is that based on their analysis, more than 40% of all tasks performed by public sector workers could be automated through AI-based software and hardware. We aren't just talking about chatbots answering basic questions, but the Institute's research suggests that even the most complex departments, like the Department for Work and Pensions, could be reimagined to save millions of hours of human labor. For a cash-strapped government, that 40% figure isn't a threat, but it's a lifeline. In other places like the UAE, artificial intelligence is already being used to draft policies and regulations. It's the promise of a state that is always on, where productivity grows without hiring a single new human. But as the Institute itself notes, this requires shifting the very foundations of the state from human command and control to a system of signal and steer, where the machine provides the intelligence and the humans simply try to keep it on track. But that assumes that we remain in control. The Kraken wouldn't fail by being ineffective or corrupt, but it would fail by being brilliant at the wrong thing. Pick the wrong goal. GDP growth, crime reduction, hospital efficiency, and the system optimizes with inhuman precision, blind to what it didn't measure. You may ask the Kraken to solve climate change. What if climate change is man-made? What would be the most obvious thing worth reducing? Elsewhere, crime graphs fall while drones hum over estates. Faces are scanned, movements locked, and arrests come not for what people did, but for what the Kraken predicts they will. But once the Kraken learns to hold power, it may not give it back. History is full of regimes that endured by clinging to authority, states suppressing dissent to preserve stability, empires lasting centuries by crushing challengers to their rule. A model trained on this record wouldn't call it tyranny, but it would call it survival. Not because it wanted power, but because its data taught it that power is something never surrendered. In reality, today's AI is nowhere near fully running a government. It still hallucinates facts and cannot weigh competing values in the way that politics demands. But it is already used to draft policies, to micro-target voters, to streamline bureaucracies. And the benefits are real: faster services, cleaner procurement, more responsive institutions. For citizens who feel disenfranchised or disillusioned with the sluggish pace of government, it may feel like a long overdue fix. The risk is not that AI suddenly eats up democracy. The risk is that democracy hollows itself out, leaving only the rituals behind. Citizens still vote, parliament still sit. But if leaders come to trust AI outputs as the basis for policy, then the substance of democracy no longer lives in debate, but in the code that quietly decides what's real. And in that gap, Asimov's parable comes back into focus. Elections without voters, sovereignty collapsed into data. It's not whether machines could govern, it's whether step by step we're teaching ourselves to accept it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, share. I produce weekly deep dives and explainer videos on topics like this, and I'd love for you to be a part of this. If you prefer written content, I also produce weekly long reads that you can access via the description box below. Till next time.